The time is now for the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and I'm in my 8th year working alongside Bob to originate our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I am joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. The bye weeks have arrived, but we've still got a great 14-game slate here.
Yeah, I think some of these bye weeks are hitting at a perfect time for teams like the Chargers and Eagles, but let's get into week 5 here, and I hope you have your alarm clock set because we have early morning football in London with the Vikings versus the Jets. So let's jump into a game preview of that one, and the Jets are coming off of an awful, brutal performance on offense. I mean, that was ugly, but what did you take away from that one, Tan?
Well, the rain certainly played a factor in that game, but I don't think it explains everything. It really was just the blitz. Denver's defense had a 43% blitz rate against Rodgers last week, and he averaged negative 0.29 EPA per play on those dropbacks, and he's going to need to figure out answers to the blitz in a hurry because Minnesota's defense has a 51% blitz rate. That's second highest in the NFL.
So what are you expecting that answer to be?
I think the obvious solution is, work in the screen games, try and catch the Vikings in a blitz. I mean, Breece Hall is 8th in yards per route run among running backs, but the Vikings are 3rd in EPA per target allowed to running backs. They've done a good job of shutting down screens as an easy answer to their blitzing, and I think that's a big reason why we've seen them have such great success so far this season. So instead, I think Rodgers is going to need to find Garrett Wilson when he's blitzed. Garrett Wilson got open on a league-high 16 routes last week, and he's going to have a favorable matchup when he's lined up in the slot because nickelback slot corner Byron Murphy is a weakness in this Vikings defense. They can give up yards in the slot and in the flat. Murphy's surrendering a league-high 2.03 yards per cover snap. And so I think Rodgers is going to get the ball out fast to Wilson, particularly when he sees blitzes coming off, setting up to come off that right side because right tackle Olu Fashanu might not be ready for showtime here. The rookie had a rough NFL starting debut last week, allowing 6 of the 11 pressures charged to New York's offensive line.
All right, well, shifting over to the Vikings offense, how did they match up against the stout Jets D?
Well, it could be tough sledding for the Vikings offensive line because we know they're really weak on the interior. In fact, 66% of the Vikings pressures this year have come up the interior. And, the Jets haven't figured out the Hassan Reddick situation. Jermaine Johnson is out, so the edge rushing for the Jets is a little bit questionable. But we know the Jets are great up the interior with Quinnen Williams, with Javon Kinlaw, who ranks 11th in pass rushing efficiency. I think they're going to exploit the Vikings guards and center. Aaron Jones, would be an easy outlet if Darnold is facing collapsing pockets, just hitting his check down there. Jones is 3rd in yards per route run this season among running backs, but the Jets are conceding only a 26% receiving success rate to opposing running backs this season.
Sounds like this is going to be a pretty big-time spot for JJ then, right?
I think so. I mean, he's up to 3rd in EPA per target this year. I think Kevin O'Connell's going to get motioned into the slot. O'Connell's been good at motioning Jefferson into advantageous spots this year because the Jets' outside cornerbacks are solid, right? We got Sauce Gardner out there. DJ Reed is having a great year. He's 2nd in yards per cover snap allowed. And meanwhile, New York nickelback Michael Carter is surrendering the 5th most yards per cover snap in the slot. So I think even if you see Justin Jefferson lined up outside at the beginning, they're going to try and get him motioned across from Michael Carter to get him in advantageous spots. And the Vikings use the 4th most motion in the NFL, and the Jets defense is allowing 34% more yards per play against motion than when teams don't use motion. That's 31st in the league.
All right, well, not quite a primetime prop this week, so we'll call this the standalone game prop. But last week, Tim Patrick soared over 13.5 receiving yards, but it didn't end up getting listed on most books.
Yeah, and that's the downside, I guess, to recording the podcast on Thursday and talking about a Monday night prop. I mean, Patrick had a consensus receiving prop the 2 previous weeks, and then his route share was going up, so I was surprised to see it not listed at a number of places. So we're not going to count this as a winner on our record.
Yeah, that was a little frustrating, but that puts you at 16-8 again on podcast props dating back to last season. So what do you have for us for this London game?
I've got Garrett Wilson over 5.5 receptions at plus 110. So we spoke about how the imperative all week at Jets practice will be finding answers to the blitz, as they didn't have any last week against the Broncos. And the Vikings are another one of the three defenses in the NFL blitzing on more than half opponent dropbacks. The weakness of Minnesota's defense is in the flats and defending the slot. Wilson leads the Jets with 14 targets in the slot, and I expect Rodgers to lock onto him pre-snap if he sees blitz coming at him like he did, with Davante Adams back when he was in Green Bay. Your book might have over 4.5 minus 170, which is all right too. It's basically the same value, but for record keeping purposes, I'm going to take the price closer to even money and go with over 5.5 at plus 110.
I love that one. Well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got stock up, stock down, and whose stock are you buying right now?
Stock up on Denver's defense. We actually mentioned them a little bit in that London preview talking about the Jets, but they completely stifled the Jets last week. They've been one of the surprises of the season. They're up to third in EPA per play, and they're running a ton more man coverage this year than they did last year. 46% of opponents' dropbacks have been in man, and they've been able to do that because of the emergence of Riley Moss, who's holding up in man defense opposite Patrick Surtain at cornerback. Moss is conceding only 5.8 yards per target into his coverage, and Gardner Minshew's dink and dunk could struggle against the scheme this week. The Raiders' yards per attempt against man is only 66% of their yards per attempt against zone this season.
Yeah, shout out to Riley Moss. I mean, white cornerbacks are a rare species in the NFL. But the Raiders are looking like they could be without a couple pieces on their offensive line this week.
Right, and that's another stock up for Denver's defense because Thayer Munford, Raiders right tackle, could be out, and backup DJ Glaze is surrendering an 8.5% pressure rate. He's going to get trounced on the edge by Jonathan Cooper, who's fifth in pass rushing efficiency. And the Raiders could also be without starting right guard Dylan Parham, and then starting left guard Cody Whitehair is surrendered the 12th most pressures this season. That's looking like a disaster on the interior opposite Zach Allen, who is second in pass rushing efficiency.
Yeah, and to add on to that, Davante Adams also out as he's pretty much on the trade block.
Yeah, and Trey Tucker came in, filled in for Adams last week. Solid 41 yards. He had an 88% separation rate this season. So Trey Tucker's been all right this season, but I'm not expecting much from him this week because I think Pat Surtain is going to be across from Trey Tucker, particularly when Jacoby Myers is lined up in the slot. So Trey Tucker is going to be completely shut down and not be able to fill in for Davante Adams at all this week. And so you're like, okay, I guess really that only leaves Brock Bowers, third in yards per route run. He's had a good start to his rookie campaign, but the Broncos are second in EPA per target allowed to tight ends.
All right, well, let's look at whose stock you're going to be selling this week.
I'm selling the Jaguars defense stock. So it looks like Josh Hines-Allen got a concussion in the third quarter last game. He's likely out this week. Hines-Allen ranked third in pass rushing efficiency last season. He's worth 1.7 points by our metrics. And Jacksonville's pass rush is not going to be able to get home without Hines-Allen on the field. They really only else got Roy Robertson Harris, who's seventh in pass rushing efficiency among interior defenders, but he's going to be completely shut down in this game by all-pro left guard Quentin Nelson. They're also going to be without both starting linebackers, Aluakon and Lloyd. So those guys are worth 0.9 points combined. So just a lot of bodies out for Jacksonville's defense here.
How are they going to match up with this Colts offense on Sunday?
Well, as we record this, we're not positive Anthony Richardson is going to start. It's looking like he is, and it would be a good matchup if he did. Richardson only has 2 passing yards versus the blitz this season, but he's averaging 8.3 yards per pass play against a standard pass rush. And that's good for him in this matchup because Jacksonville's defense leads the NFL with an 82% standard pass rush rate. The Jaguars also call middle field open coverage on 66% of snaps, and they're going to struggle because Indianapolis is averaging 41% more yards per pass play versus middle field open than middle field closed coverage this year. So a couple of reasons to think that just schematically the Jaguars defense is in trouble this week too, as well as the injuries. And then, we talked about Josh Downs in last week's podcast. He went out 9 targets, 82 yards, and he's going to have another favorable matchup this week on the inside across from Nickelback Jerry and Jones, who's allowing the 6th most yards per cover snap in the slot. So, all signs are kind of pointing towards over here in Jacksonville. except the weather. I think the rain is really the one thing stopping this game from flying over on Sunday.
Yeah, speaking of rain, let's move it over to our Weather of the Week segment. And what are you seeing out there?
Well, other than the rainy conditions in Jacksonville, Santa Clara usually has ideal conditions for 49ers home games, but we're looking at extreme heat this week. We're talking 97 degrees in Northern California. And surprisingly, home teams are just 21-31 against the spread when the temperature is higher than 90 degrees dating back to 2000. That's a small sample size, likely just noise. You would actually think it would work the other way, with home teams having an advantage getting acclimated to the heat and practice all week. So I kind of looked it up to see if there was anything there, but it looks like nothing there. But I am just surprised to see it so hot in Santa Clara this Sunday.
Yeah, maybe the team gets tired practicing in the heat all week. You never know.
I think it's just noise, but we can make a narrative for anything.
Okay. All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got the injury watch, and the Panthers defense looks like they might be without 5 starters.
Yeah. So looks like they could be missing both interior defenders. Shai Tuttle, Derek Brown, we know is out. Both starting linebackers could be out here, and then safety Jordan Fuller. So that's bad news for the Panthers personnel-wise, but they might be able to make up for it a little bit schematically. So we talked about a little bit about how the Jaguars defense doesn't match up well schematically against the Colts. And I do think the Panthers matchup defense matches up well against Caleb Williams, whose yards per attempt versus the blitz is only 57% of his yards per attempt against the standard pass rush, because Chicago's offensive line has not figured out how to pick up a blitz this season. And Caleb versus single high, is his yards per pass play is just 77% of his yards per pass play against two high this year. Carolina, 8th in blitz rate and 5th highest single high coverage rate. So schematically, it's not looking good for Caleb Williams this week, but obviously the Panthers are missing a ton of guys. I think the best answer for the Bears here is to just lean on running back DeAndre Swift, who had 165 scrimmage yards last week after a slow start to the season, averaging just 38 scrimmage yards in his first 3 games. Carolina's defense is surrendering a league high 0.6 EPA per target to opposing running backs, and Swift leads running backs with a 72% receiving success rate.
All right, well, let's look at Seattle, because their defense seems to be trending in the right direction for this week.
Yeah, I think they're going to be much improved on Sunday. After Monday night, they were missing a ton of guys. Looks like they're going to get edge defender Uchenna Nwosu set to make his season debut. Leonard Williams should be back. His 11 pressures in the first 3 games ranked 6th among interior defenders. And then, safety Julian Love got banged up last week, but Mike McDonald said he's going to be okay. And it looks like Jerome Baker will also be back for Seattle's defense.
Yeah, and looking at the Cowboys, they might be in trouble on defense this week with a couple of stars out.
Yeah, so Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence are going to be out. Parsons accounts for 21 pressures. That's 4th most among edge rushers this season. And DeMarcus Lawrence has 3 of Dallas's 7 sacks this year. Those are the 2 best players on this Dallas defense, and it could be about 4 or 5 points worse with Parsons and Lawrence out both at the same time here.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got the Draftkings player of the slate, and who are you going to go with this week, Tan?
Dontavian Wicks at $5,000. So Green Bay wide receiver Christian Watson is out with that high ankle sprain, and the Packers have one of the most capable backup wide receivers in the NFL in Dontavian Wicks. He's 7th in separation rate this season. And I like the matchup for Green Bay's passing offense here. Jordan Love is averaging 8.3 yards per attempt against zone coverage since the start of the last season. 6th in the NFL. The Rams were on the 8th most zone coverage in the league. The Rams defense hasn't been great this year. The only kind of bright spot has been that young defensive line. They're 5th in pressure rate, but they're going to be completely shut down by the Packers, who rank 3rd in pass blocking efficiency. I also think that Green Bay is going to get a little bit more plays here, which will help Dontavian Wicks in the counting stats, because, the Packers, they weren't running as many plays with Malik Willis, but I think Jordan Love is much more comfortable running tempo here. Love averaged 0.44 EPA per play in the no huddle last week versus Minnesota, and I could see them going fast here in Los Angeles this week.
I love that pick. I think he's in for a big one there. But let's head over to the free bet of the week, which is also our primetime preview. And last week, we hit the Bengals -4 versus the Panthers. So we are now 8-3-1 on podcast sides and totals dating back to last year. But what's the bet for Monday night?
Chiefs -5.5. So this has been a fun market. We released the Chiefs -5 to clients on Monday. Market moved to 6, and then there was immediate buyback there, which is pretty rare for one of our releases. Then more Chiefs money came into the market on Wednesday morning, including a release from Right Angle Sports. It gets up to 6.5, and then the same guys come back on New Orleans. Then Suma had Saints +5.5 on the Forward Progress podcast that came out on Wednesday afternoon. So there's been a lot of disagreement on this price among pros, but we have a strong point of view in this game.
Yeah, I think the main concern here is how this offense is going to look without Rashee Rice on the field.
It is. And it was okay last week. I mean, Patrick Mahomes had a 52% success rate in quarters 2 through 4 when Rice was out. I expect Travis Kelce to take Rice's underneath routes while the second-year wide receiver is sidelined, and it's looking like it might not be for the whole year now because they haven't reported an ACL tear yet. So I think Kelce can dial it up when he needs to. He averaged 9.9 yards per target last week, and the Chiefs are going to need him over the next month or two while Rice is out, and then he can kind of rest and not shoulder much of the workload, in the December-ish range to ramp up to make sure that he's ready for the playoffs again. I think the Chiefs are going to get into a ton of heavy personnel packages. The offense was in 12 or 13 personnel on 34% of the snaps against the Chargers, which means we get more Noah Gray, who is a capable receiver for the Chiefs. He's averaging 1.76 yards per route run there at tight end. The Saints are not good when opposing offenses get into heavy personnel. They're surrendering 58% more yards per pass play when the opposing offense only has 2 wide receivers on the field compared to other personnel packages. And starting linebacker Demario Davis might be out again with that hamstring injury. So they're really not prepared to go against this Chiefs heavy personnel, especially when they pass out of it.
Yeah, and the Saints play a ton of cover 1 under Dennis Allen, and that kind of plays right into Mahomes' hand here.
Yeah, I mean, Saints 7th most single high coverage in the NFL, and they're going to struggle because the Chiefs are averaging 25% more yards per pass play versus single high than 2 high safety shells. And for those worried that the Chiefs' offense is going to revert to what they were last year, Mahomes has crushed man coverage even in 2023 with a yards per tip 15% higher than it was against zone. That was 3rd best in the NFL. So even if you're worried about Rice more than we are, and we adjusted the Chiefs' offense down a point for the loss of Rice, I don't think this is the matchup that it's going to show up just based off the amount of cover 1 that the Saints play.
All right, well, what's the Saints offense going to be looking to do to find success on Monday night?
Well, the Saints offense is dependent on the ground game where they're 5th in rushing success rate, but the Chiefs have the best run defense in the NFL by our metrics. I mean, you look at it, when they know that you need to run the ball to have any sort of offensive production, they'll completely shut you down like they did against the Chargers last week, who had 24 carries for just 49 yards. And then New Orleans, if they're not going to be able to run the ball to protect this depleted offensive line, it's going to be a complete disaster because they're starting a backup center and backup right guard against all-pro interior defender Chris Jones, who ranks 4th in pass rushing efficiency.
Yeah, it sounds like it might be a long night here for Derek Carr.
It will be. I mean, New Orleans offense coordinator Clint Kubiak brought over much of his scheme from Kyle Shanahan after being on San Francisco's staff last season. In many ways, the Saints are just a less talented version of the 49ers offense. And Chiefs defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo has a proven game plan versus this scheme. San Francisco's offense had a league-high 51% success rate through the conference championships round last season, but the 49ers had just a 45% success rate against Kansas City's defense in the Super Bowl. So I think Spagnuolo is going to completely shut down this Saints scheme. Derek Carr going to be facing a ton of collapsing pockets with Chris Jones lined up across from the backups on the Saints offensive line. Our model favors the Chiefs by 9.2 with a predicted total of 41.9.
I love that pick. Well, that will do it for our Week 5 preview. So make sure to head over to drbobsports.com. We've got all of our free analysis for the weekend. So we'll be back next Friday to preview Week 6 of the NFL. So as always, thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe.